great. All right. Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of the OpenJS Foundation Cross Project Council meeting. Today we are going to do a working session focused on code of conduct. But before we get into that, I'll ask if there are any announcements.
Big news, everyone. Big news.
Yay.
The OpenJS World schedule has been announced, and it actually, I've been like super excited for this for a while. The program committee did an amazing job. There's some killer keynotes, and it's all going to be virtual, so you don't have to worry. Although we will miss having tacos and empanadas with everybody in Austin, we'll just be in Austin spiritually, and make our margaritas at home, and we're going to have a great time. So, check out our blog post on the openjsf.org blog for all the info. We're also doing a lot of exciting planning for Collab Summit, which includes expanding Collab Summit from a 2-day thing to a 3-day thing. So we'll start on Monday with some great new contributor content, and then we'll have the conference on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then we'll get back into Collab Summit content with those project focused sessions on Thursday and Friday. And so we would really love for everyone to come and to get involved, and tell your friends. It's gonna be a good time.
Woo. Great, that's exciting. Thanks, Dory.
Awesome.
We had an amazing program committee, I must say, reps from so many projects. So thank you, thank you.
That's great. Great, well, congratulations. And I'm excited. Anything else before we get into things?
I've been so focused on that other stuff, I don't know.
Great, well, we'll just get into today's business. I'm pasting something into the chat there. Jory was so gracious in putting together a little bit of a presentation for us to kind of get a grasp on where we are now, what are kind of problems, the hurdles that we're facing at the moment around code of conduct and the related aspects, and potentially how we might move forward and make some more progress. Do you want to share and walk us through it, Jory?
Sure, yeah. So to contextualize this document, and if I can screen share if that would be helpful to y'all, but otherwise I'll just let you consume it at your own pace. But to contextualize it a bit, one of the things that I spend a pretty decent amount of my time on is helping projects navigate and understand what they need to be doing and where resources are and so on and so forth. And there have been a lot of times that even I feel very confused about what's where and that kind of stuff. So this deck was mostly to, I'm getting some +1s to screen share, so I'll do that then. Let me actually do that. So this deck was in large part to help me get organized, and I think that I hope that it will help y'all get a bit organized too, and to also think about what some of the challenges we have with the current state of things, and maybe where might we want to take it moving forward. So on the first slide, which you should see here, and I don't want to totally why can't I do this? All right, well, I don't want to totally do in present mode because I think that will make it harder for me to see your faces and stuff in the chat, but there we go, is the reference materials. And as you can see, we have 3 different documents that contain information that a person might need to understand RCOC. And we have several different open pull requests right now related to the COC. And that's just more for FYI. From these documents, we have about 4 different like areas that are places that in some way govern our code of conduct. They're the project specific reporting environment. So obviously the report at Node or AMP or for each individual project. There's the CPC specific reporting path, which is listed in 2 different ways, and I'll show you in just a second, where we have currently the report at list.openjsf.org, but there's also a reports at openjsf.org that's imagined, and it's unclear if those are the same things. We have the code of conduct panel, which has been a group of people that we've had different conversations about how do we populate this panel, and some different ideas there. And that's the group that would ostensibly get the message, a message sent to COC-escalation. And then we have a 4th group, which is imagined, but not created per se, called from one of our documents, which is basically a subgroup or a working group that would be created, which is not clear if it has been created or not. In the slides 4 through 7, what I've tried to capture is the questions that that have popped up or that I have fielded, and here in the project specific reporting slide, number 4, these are questions that have definitely been asked by the people that we are asking to implement our policies. So, basically, how do we do that so that we're in alignment, that we're following the rules? Other additional questions are, we're not entirely sure what to expect. So where could we go find out what we need to know to expect some things? There's questions about the relationship between the code of conduct panel and the project's autonomy in handling its own reporting. So basically, what authority does it have if somebody does escalate something? And how can we get involved with evolving foundation policies on code of conduct matters moving forward? These are questions for which we really don't have super clear answers just yet. For the reports list, as I pointed out, we have this discrepancy where we're saying we want people to report at openjsf.org, but the list that we currently have is report at list.openjsf.org. So, one open question is that meant to be the same thing, or is that actually 2 different? What are the 2 different things there? So that's something to go ahead, Brian.
Yep, they should be the same thing. It should be list.openjsf.org. I can very easily create an alias for report at openjsf.org that would just point to the list. But let's maybe pick one and stick with it.
Yeah. So I think maybe this also just highlights that because we're in like this very like important space where there's also there can be some naming issues, right? It's hard to come up with like a unique name. Like I gave pause and said, well, I don't know if those are supposed to be 2 different things or not. So currently that mailing list is populated by some folks from the CPC and staff. But one of the things we haven't figured out yet is what actual spaces is this group supposed to be responsible for, and what might different implications be for projects if a violation occurs in one of our spaces. So we'll work. These are open questions. We'll work on them, right? It's not like we need to come up with the answer now, but for the COC escalation, we just have some generic open questions from folks primarily who haven't, who are trying to implement the policies. So, what is the nature of the panel? Is it actually is it like the Supreme Court of Code of Conduct, where it's like you could appeal to that and then like their final ruling is, that's final, or is it just optional? Is there if they take a decision on a project for a certain thing, does that set precedent that other projects need to follow? And then this is also related to the another question from last week is, do we want people who are active in the CPC to be populating this panel / active in specific projects? Or is this something that we want to include more experts from outside the community who may be great advisors for this space? So there. And then of course our unchartered or unnamed / as yet to be chartered group. The questions are basically what activities, what's been delegated, is its output something that we just intend to be optional, like it's advisory materials, or do we expect that the output from the group is something that all of the projects are going to have to consume? How does it engage with the projects on the changes it wants to see? Those would be questions, right? Open questions. Issues related to this are, as you can see, like the document management and distribution, what are the notice and reporting requirements, and then also communicating like effectively and clearly with broader project communities, because we've got folks who are coming here and know what's going on, but not necessarily the folks that need to implement the projects but aren't very active in the CPC also need to have the same clarity about what we're doing, right? And then challenges. So this is my perspective now. Like these are the challenges that I've noticed, and maybe they're not all shared. And I'd love to know, what other people think. But I think one of the challenges we have is that we have this system, but we don't have super clear stories for the people who would be moving through the system. And I think that needs to be perhaps spelled out a little bit more, where, what's the use case for a person filing a report? What is, obviously should be, in my opinion, that's the primary constituency to try and serve. But also project maintainers who have to implement our policies, like, are we getting them the information and the support that they need? Is that very clear? Is that very accessible to them? The autonomy of our group. So here is a question that has popped up several times, like, okay, the scope of my capacity in, say, a project reporting group, how does that relate to the CPC reporting group or the COCP panel? Who's got final say, in for example, the question of a report? Is there any hierarchy there? And how do we work together on COC related issues in a way that doesn't involve people stepping on toes or just losing sight of some other project or effort? I think perhaps we've got too much complexity. This is, again, just my observation of the challenge. We've got these 4 different groups, and perhaps those identifiers are not unique enough or to limit confusion. Someone pointed out yesterday, like one of the things could be that a reporter accidentally contacts the wrong group to respond to an issue, and then there's some violation of trust that may occur, and that's really bad. Like, we really don't want to let somebody down in that moment. We also have a lot of people who are really passionate about this topic, and asking them to get involved in number of groups may be splitting their focus a little bit too much when we can make more progress in one. I don't know. And then the other thing is, I think that the more that we have, the more connections and communications lines we have to build into the system, and that makes it just more challenging to keep everybody informed and up to speed. So for a straw person proposal of what we could do, and maybe like another point I wanted to make is, like, maybe this is fine, like maybe once, but I think that may be fine in a future state where we have a lot more participants, right? but straw person proposal for now could be that we merge some concepts. One being the code of conduct working group that we may or may not have chartered with the CPC reporting group. So the folks on that list and others who may raise their hand to volunteer. And we treat it similarly to the standards working group, where there's a scope and a list of priority areas that are approved by the CPC, and that group is empowered to make progress on these issues in its own repo. So we're carving that out and making it a little bit more clear where these things are tackled. And part 2 of my straw person proposal would be to confirm that the COCP is an advisory panel, and that panel is there to do QA testing and feedback and that kind of thing, analysis on the policies that we're looking to propose, and handles escalations when a project is requesting that extra assistance, or at the consent of a project when a reporter has escalated a thing, has escalated an issue. But in my notes, I have a link to the Electron working group, that's community and safety working group. I think that's kind of very similar to what I would be proposing for this merged COC working group / CPC reporting group. But this is just spaghetti on a wall. It is not anything that, I don't know if that's a common saying. Toby would probably make me put $1 in my bucket there, but that's just it's just a proposal. I'm not committed to it in any way. Anyway, so this is what I put together, just to share and start, conversing. And I hope this framing has been helpful to other people.
Yeah, it definitely has. And I'll just say I'm familiar with the spaghetti on the wall concept, so you're good. You're good there. This is really helpful. Dylan has a good note in the chat as well, if you want to chime in, Dylan.
Yeah, mostly just we haven't talked about the one thing that I think is missing from this, which is the onboarding / training, or whatever you want to call it, to make sure people are aware of what the COC is, and strategies to make sure that people are aware of things not to do to get in trouble with the COC. Just like basically, we know we need a COC, we know someone's going to violate it, but what can we do to risk or to reduce the opportunities for people to violate it without, like, you know what I mean? Like, most of us on this call are very familiar with code of conducts, but oftentimes people new to open source may not be familiar with the concept at all. So just making sure that if some strategy, when someone joins a project, like, we make sure they're supported and understanding what the expectations are. And we do a pretty good job of this with Dojo, but I'm not sure if we have something formalized anywhere.
That reminds me of like what the Global Diversity CFP Day crew does for all of its volunteers beforehand. There's like a 15-minute like training thing. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
That'd be lovely, and I would love to see us have something like that. And the question would be like, well, who's responsible for trading that asset? And, like, how do we action it?
Right.
Well, I know like for the Node project, there's like an actual onboarding for collaborators. And I'm pretty sure part of that is like a reminder that you need to read and follow the COC. But if there was some other, like, I don't know, like you're thinking more of a 15 minutes video or something, I don't know, could be like, here's another thing you can go watch.
So one thing that might be worth adding here as well, Dylan, depending on the way you want to do it, like the way in which Node has implemented the code of conduct, we have a moderation repo inside of our org, which is private. And we have like basically a playbook. So it's not just the code of conduct, but it's moderation guidelines that are extremely important here as well, because otherwise, like, how do you even apply the code of conduct? In fact, I would argue a code of conduct without moderation guidelines is worse than no code of conduct.
Right.
So what we have is we have like really, really clear outlines and playbooks for a number of different scenarios, including I'm a collaborator and someone's violating the code of conduct who isn't a collaborator, or I'm a collaborator and someone's violating the code of conduct who is a collaborator, or I'm a collaborator in leadership. They're kind of like slightly different playbooks, and it outlines kind of step by step how folks can moderate things. And basically at a baseline, if you're a collaborator and it's a non-collaborator who's violating the code of conduct, we empower every single one of our collaborators to do the moderation themselves. They just need to document the action that they took in the moderation repo. And this is kind of like a recursive process in that, like, if someone violated, like if someone utilized the code of conduct in bad faith, that itself would be a violation of the code of conduct, which there's a whole playbook on how you follow that if you feel like a collaborator violated the code of conduct. So it's very, very self-enforcing. And in Node, really the only times where the code of conduct committee gets involved is when people need to be banned, when someone wants to make an anonymous report. So I won't say who it was about, but I have had conflict with people before and like have relationship problems. And, you know, I have made that from the report. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. The reason why I mentioned that is I think that there's ways for your project to kind of like self-regulate without needing like a full committee.
Yeah.
And a lot of that can be managed by yourselves.
I think a lot of the projects could benefit from what Node has done over the years, because I know that like the history of Node is kind of that you were not great at this in the first couple of years, and now you're one of the best at it. So just you've definitely learned a lot over the years that other projects maybe just haven't had to deal with, but you know, could benefit from that knowledge that you've gained too.
I also think what Dylan, you were suggesting with a video is something that, you know, the foundation could optionally, you know, provide, particularly for like there's a different scale for the projects of say Node and node size versus the projects like that are much smaller, like Grunt, right? And so a video that, or some kind of material that a project that doesn't have the scale to support like whole teams could use, I think would be helpful.
Yeah, reusable assets,
Yeah.
I think would be, you know, drawn from whatever group or project we have, you know, experience in, to say here's, and it doesn't have to be like the complicated version, but I think where you're going, Jory, is like some base assets that any project could apply to start out with would actually be quite helpful. You know, a new project joins, oh, here's some base assets. I suspect a lot of the time, unless they've already got something, they'll say, oh yeah, that makes sense, let's just do that, right?
So
Absolutely.
I guess my concern with that is kind of similar to Miles' point earlier of like no, I think he said this, I might have misunderstood, but like having no code of conduct is better than having a code of conduct that you don't enforce and don't like maintain effectively, because in a similar way you can just say, oh yeah, we'll take that, and then not do it, which
Right.
is the concern I have there. And there does need to be like intent informing those habits and approaches. So that's the only thing I'd say on that. And then additionally, I'd just like to add that, like, personally, I definitely think that there are things that, you know, Node could improve still. And I also do think it's worth, you know, if we do pull things in, also kind of going through and continuing to iterate and see how we can evolve things to make them better.
With that being said, to the slide that Jory has here, Jory, I'm super in support of like taking these various initiatives that we have and just creating a focused working group to solve these problems. And we're probably not going to solve them in a discussion in this single meeting, but I think that the proposal that you're making here is very sound. And I think that a great way to move forward is to get a group of people who are focused on it, meeting regularly and being empowered to make those decisions. I guess one question to you on this, are you imagining that the merged group would start as a working group, or would it start as a team, build out its purpose and charter, and then become chartered?
So, you know, I'd love for it to go a little quicker than we were able to, and we were just kind of getting when we went through this process with the standards team and converting it to like a real chartered working group. we were doing that for the first time. So that took a little bit more time as we figured that out. It would be great to move more quickly on this because these issues are very real. And to that end, if the CPC were able to help us fast track that, that would be great.
I'd also like to extend that and say, like, some of the answers around onboarding are particularly confusing and challenging. And so it would be nice to have a group that kind of can, like, whether it's for current groups onboarding or future onboarding, just make sure to disambiguate that and like get clear guidelines out.
Yeah, maybe even to be more direct to Tierney's point, these issues have contributed significantly to certain projects being slow to get through the incubation process. And that's a bummer. I want to go fast on that stuff. So to the extent that we can kind of unlock this, I think it would be great for a lot of those new project community members who want to get in and get involved.
I think, I agree we're not going to solve all these things in one meeting. I do think it'd be worth spending at least a small amount of time seeing if we can draw that line between the two and have agreement on that. I think you have the COCP pretty much as it's written, except for a few things, like the handles COC escalations from reporters with project consent. I'm not sure we've got the project consent requirement.
So we don't, and this is something though that I think has been a piece of feedback from some projects, because of the escalation path and that sort of like the finality, for example, of the COCP's decision on an issue is unclear. The concern is that a project doesn't necessarily want to cede that final decision over to the COCP without having the choice to have done so. And so, I think this as a modification would at least temporarily allay that concern, but that would be something. This is a piece of the puzzle that isn't clear in our current documentation for projects. And if there's pushback on it, then we should have time to dialogue with the projects and get it into a place where they are comfortable.
Yeah, agreed. I guess if it's like an optional escalation, then what happens if somebody thinks they want to escalate but the project doesn't agree? Like then there's not really an escalation path in that point.
Can I make
that's kind of, sorry, go ahead.
Can I make a suggestion here though? Like, I don't think we're going to solve this right now, but we've had the foundation formed for over a year now, and we still haven't managed to kind of get this off the ground. And at least the part to this that I personally really like, and I think is like super actionable and really what we should be doing immediately, is forming a working group that is focused on this, is focused on like solving this, and is chartered by the CPC to kind of like own and run and come up with this. Like the idea of the COCP, the idea of these different things that we've had, we kind of built that in a vacuum, and not that they couldn't be successful, but like at this point they have not gained traction and are in fact actually like causing friction. So I think not that we need to kind of like throw everything out and start from scratch. I think that the bit to this that I find really compelling is, the CPC has so many things that we're working on now. Let's get a group that is empowered to focus on thinking this through and coming up with like the proper approach that we can use that's flexible for our projects.
Yeah, I'll support that. I'd like to hear more. I don't understand the causing friction, causing problems part, but
like onboarding and lack of clarity for projects.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a bunch of different like implementation details, right, that are really important to think through, that have been really hard for us to think through like completely in the manner that we've currently been proceeding, which is very asynchronous and generally just kind of doing so in.
Right. I totally agree. We haven't made progress. I just hadn't heard specific problems that like, hey, this, anyway, doesn't really matter. I think the key message is we wanted to work a different way, which sounds totally good if we can make that work.
So do we feel though, I mean, I think one of the pieces here is like, we've already got a group that's signed up on this reports at list. And I think it's a trivial thing for additional people to raise their hand and get added to that list. Do we
Is that
feel
a same group? Like, I thought the reports were the ones that people with the reports would go to.
So yes, so this report list, and there we go, this mailing list, which is populated with these 10 people, that list of names came from a couple of series of earlier conversations we had about a different PR some number of weeks ago. And that list, those people raised their hand to agree to respond if a issue came in, if there was a report that was filed, that they would respond to moderate that. My proposal is, because for better, for worse, we have had no messages so far, that can we leverage those folks who have already agreed to be plugged into this particular topic to be the working group to get started?
I just wouldn't limit, like, so I just talk from my personal viewpoint. I don't necessarily need to volunteer to be handling the specific reports, but I might want to be involved in the group that figures out what the processes are going to be, right? So I don't know if other people would be in the same ballpark, and just don't want to discourage anybody from joining because they have to do one thing versus some of the other work.
Yeah, that's a fair point. There may be a difference, and people may just want to participate in the formation, not the ongoing maintenance, effectively.
And the reports is also sensitive information. So if we have a group of 50 people who are working to agree on the processes, that sounds totally good. Do we want 50 people seeing reports that come in? If they're not going to be acting on them, that wouldn't be my first choice either.
I think that's all very fair, and maybe something we can kind of reason about. I do want to say that one of my concerns is that, and you this was a nice, I think, way of framing it, the difference between like booting something up and maintaining the thing in an ongoing fashion are very different. And I want to ensure that the people who will be maintaining the thing in an ongoing fashion, that their voices are hyper prioritized in this boot up phase, right? So that, because those are the folks that are really going to have to live and experience and manage the thing. And I feel just a strong desire to ensure that we have plenty of people who also want to maintain the thing moving forward to participate.
Those people should definitely be part of it, right? Like that's a very good point.
So I may like encourage or posit that folks who want to support or provide feedback or in some way just offer, hey, did you think of X, Y, or Z? Like that is perhaps a different that's a different level of participation than folks who are like actively kind of going, okay, we are building this thing out because we are actually going to go implement it many times over in different places and run the thing ongoing.
And we can flesh that out as we work through this as a working group.
I guess I would like to reemphasize Joy's request at one point to like kind of help ensure that we're just moving this along. And I at least want to kind of step back to that and say that I personally support that. And I think this is something that we should probably prioritize in fast tracking.
Yeah, I agree. What are our next steps? I think a repo to start moving issues to and creating issues, working through user stories and kind of bootstrapping a group makes sense.
I would say like a first thing that we could do if we want to get the ball rolling here really quickly would be like, yeah, getting a repo open for like code of conduct working group, getting an issue open with a doodle so we can all find a time that we can all, the people that want to get involved can meet next week. And then I would say like get a meeting together and have a first meeting where we basically draft the charter and then get that to the CPC as soon as possible. I reviewed our governance, and the way in which we landed it was that like chartering takes the same amount of time as like any change to governance. So it needs 2 weeks or the appropriate sign off from members. So I think we need to kind of just kick off that process as soon as possible if we want to be like chartered and have consensus around what that means. And I think the act of creating that scope will help to like define the deliverables the group will be making.
Makes sense.
So one thing that we also changed this week for those tuning in is that we took over today's regular CPC stand to talk specifically about the code of conduct. And Joe and I were talking last week about how we'd love to kind of convert some of our CPC meetings into working sessions. I would also love to see next week us take more time to dive in during CPC meeting hours. And I don't know if maybe that's people.
Should we just use that instead of like setting up a doodle and all the other complicated stuff that I suggested?
I would love that if people could just simply because setting up a doodle requires, it's just
it's time.
Yeah, time.
We have a time already. Let's just do it.
Yeah, I'd say unless there's something urgent on the schedule, on the agenda. If there's something really urgent, maybe we just deal with that urgent thing and then switch to this. But if there isn't, we just defer to the next week.
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything urgent that we can't, just maybe ping in Slack for folks as a reminder for folks to look at the issue and whatnot. I have an update to regular member requirements and things like that I'd love to get over the finish line, but I don't think it requires a meeting. Perhaps we do a meeting next week, use this time or our CPC time to work on this next week. But do we think that moving forward as a working group, we would find our own time, or would we just borrow CPC meeting time at some sort of cadence?
I think we should do a cycle on that just because I know that the folks who care about this are also very busy and have other irons in the fire. So to that end, I'm game to find additional meeting times. I think that's important to get work done, but also we should talk about it. I don't know. There's like there's a lot of priorities that this group has, right? And my personal concern is that if we care, equally about everything, that we don't make as much progress on any one thing that we might want to make. So and thank you all very much for agreeing to focus on this particular issue for this meeting, so we can maybe really get a lot of great traction on it and get it going in a productive fluid way. And then we can take on something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's a long-term working group, it's probably going to have its own meeting time eventually, right? Like doing some saying we want to focus on it for the short term, so we'll take some CPC meetings makes sense, but it's like otherwise, if it's not going to ever have its own entity, maybe it doesn't need meetings, but like it needs its own collaboration path or
Space.
Yeah, space or whatever. Right?
Yeah. So you can call me a psychopath or whatever, but I think we should have SMART goals for this. I'm like super into, getting, things going with it.
Yep.
Yeah, what one argument very much in support of what Jory said earlier in terms of making this super, super simple, if it's maybe a bit more complex than it needs to be, it decreases the need to have continuing meetings and set up a thing where, there's a constant discussion about refining process if the process itself is simple to begin with. And this can be very helpful in terms of keeping people engaged long-term. Just drop that in there. That's learning from some other projects that we've worked on.
Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
So one thing I think is like we should probably for next meeting, if we're going to do that, choose some smaller topic we want to try and close out on, right? Because we just spent the whole meeting talking about the whole thing. I don't think we've decided anything. So I think if we just have the whole scope, we're going to end up the same way. So it's like, what's the thing we should resolve next time would be my question.
Charter. I think we draft a charter next meeting.
I may also suggest as an alternative or / in addition to, because hopefully the charter is super clear, the way we want projects to consume our COC document. That's one that's very live and it's varied. I think I may even have on PR number 515, I think I tried to break that down a little bit. It would be great to get that super clear, so I can just go open PRs and say, oh, here's how we do it now. And they go, okay, great, thank you. The end.
Great. And should we open up a repo and start to move some of these things over there, and we can start to capture pain points and things that we want to solve and achieve? I think we should.
I think that'd be great.
All right. I'll start working on some of this stuff too. Maybe we could even open up a Slack channel as well, so we can chat asynchronously as we work on some of the stuff between meetings.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Cool.
More chat.
What else for this meeting?
What can we agree on in 9 minutes? Because there's some really interesting things to dive into, but like, can we write a first draft of the charter? Like, I don't know, is that very complicated? Or even maybe not write it, but like agree on what we think the scope is?
We can maybe start a doc and put like the basic structure in it so people can maybe hack on it between now and the next meeting.
Sure. Should we throw an issue up and link to a doc?
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea.
Great.
Yeah, just even getting like the bullet points that say this is the scope, I think would go a long way for somebody being able to actually just write it into an actual charter.
Anybody want to volunteer for the issue?
I can create a box or an issue or box note.
Bite your tongue, box note.
Sorry, Google Docs. Here, I'll create a Google Doc and let me just name it. Okay, so this is,
yeah,
is
if
there
you
any
can do that and drop it in an issue, that'd be awesome.
I was going to do it into the chat here so we could start to put in some of the bullet points.
Sure.
Share. Advance. Okay.
Great. Are we going to work on it now, or should we just drop it in an issue and work on it asynchronously?
Well, I figure why don't we spend we have 7 minutes unless there's something else, just to get a starting list to see what people people think in terms of what the scope should be for that group.
I guess I could go pull up the, because I'm still screen sharing like a nerd. I could go pull up the document that has this group, like kind of.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm not sure we have this group defined anywhere.
So it's just in this Foundation Code of Conduct requirements file, which like alludes to it as a thing that it will have, but doesn't actually itself make the thing or define it or anything like that.
Okay, that much is what I understand. Since I wrote those words, it's like we should have one of these, right? But we've never done anything, to my knowledge, beyond that, right?
Right.
So, but that's a good thing we can paste into the, if you can grab that and paste it into the doc as a starting point.
Wow, I had no idea this even existed. That's awesome.
I mean, that was kind of like, we should do this. Down. We don't know what it is, but we should do it, right?
Well, eventually, you know, you write something down and then eventually it happens. So.
Hopefully, yeah.
That's the idea, yeah.
I can only view.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I tried to make it anybody who has. Oh, yeah. I always forget that. Can edit. Done. Okay, should be able to paste now. You might have to refresh the page though from it. That's good to have caught, because otherwise we'd come back and find, well, why hasn't anybody else commented?
Because they can't.
Exactly.
Okay. Sorry, my computer's being really slow. Eventually, I will be able to paste something in here. Maybe not. Nope.
Thanks for your help, Miles.
Still can't paste?
It's not you. It's
okay.
It's my computer.
Okay.
My computer's is old and it's trying to do many things at one time.
So we can paste that in. Any other things that people off the top of their head say this group should do?
I think oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think in some of your slides, is there any reporting moderation that would happen from this group? Do we want to make whatever that is clear?
Yeah. So one of the things that I had suggested, but Michael and others made a good point for not doing it, is that this group should also handle reports, because frankly, we don't really get very many of them, and it's maybe a good idea to dog food a little bit and but that's not necessarily the right thing to do, because some people aren't super comfortable. They want to be involved in the policy stuff, but maybe not involved in the enforcement. And, the access to private information is a concern. So that is just that nuance, and how to sort of separate those concerns is important.
I just added identify, nominate, and approve the team members who will be on the reporting list.
Mm-hmm.
Like that could be something delegated from the CPC to say, okay, yeah, that group is going to come up with the processes and figure out who the subset is who are on that list.
So Like that would be one thing. You know, the other thing that I'd love to make clear in the charter is the like decision-making autonomy of the group. So, you know, I think one of the things that causes us to be slower on these actions is because we have a bigger CPC group than we necessarily have people who care about a given issue like the COC, right? And we tend to be slower because we're looking for more input from a group of people who may not necessarily, and more decision making from a group of people who may not really have a strong opinion to make that. So where the group has the ability to be delegated decisions about its recommendations, e.g., like if the group were to say, the way that we want projects to consume the code of conduct is to put in their code of conduct file a single line that says this project adheres to the OpenJS Foundation code of conduct, linked to code of conduct. Like,
yep.
That could be, it'd be great if it was clear that the group could do that and then go about making sure that it was executed. I think my
so sort of have like, you know, if you split like defining the process into sub processes, there's the process around how to manage code of conduct violations. There's the process of like how to manage and maintain the code of conduct itself. There's the process of educating all team members about the code of conduct. And then there's like the process of communicating that we have a code of conduct for the projects. And maybe there's other sub processes, but like those are kind of the four that seem to, you know, at least it adds more detail than saying we'll just cover all the process of code of conduct. At least these are kind of.
Yeah, my first take is I'm not sure there's any that need to stay with the CPC. So that would be like, that's at least a break point that we should consider. Like, is it should be some processes are, some processes aren't, or is it that, like, I agree with breaking them out, listing them is great, is good, but more, you know, a key significant part is like, is there going to be a different level of autonomy over one versus the other?
I think that's to be figured out.
Yeah.
We're at time, friends. So
okay.
maybe we
Yep. Okay.
take it over to issues and everything else. Yeah. Thanks everybody. I really appreciate everybody joining and working through this, and we'll keep moving.
So
Thank
Joe,
you,
in
guys.
terms of an issue,
Likewise.
you want that in the OpenJS repo to start, I guess, because the other one doesn't exist.
Yeah, I created an issue in the CPC about chartering the COC working group.
Okay.
We'll get started.
And Joe,
Cool.
you're going to make the repo for it. Is that right?
Sure.
Okay, cool.
We'll do.
I will add like my deck here as a resource and start to try and help organize that.
Excellent.
Oh, guys, just one thing that I forgot to tell. I want to thank Jory for helping the mentorship initiative. Thank you, as a public thanks. Thank you, Jory, for helping us.
You're very welcome. All right.
Okay,
great.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.